I discovered water seeping through my basement walls on a freezing February morning in Denver, Colorado, and it took me exactly 3 hours to realize this was not a natural disaster but a calculated act of suburban warfare. The dark stains spreading across my concrete floor looked innocent enough at first, just moisture from the heavy snow we had been getting all week. But when I traced the water back to its source, I found something that made my blood run cold despite the heated basement. My name is Zachary Thompson, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision for 2 years before Karen Donnelly decided to turn my property into her personal drainage system. I am a software engineer who works from home, which means I spend a lot of time in my house and notice when things go wrong. That morning I had gone downstairs to grab some files from my storage area when I stepped into a puddle that soaked through my sock. The water was ice cold, and there was a lot of it. I followed the wetness to the eastern wall of my basement, where water was actively trickling in through several cracks in the foundation. This was wrong on every level because my house was only 7 years old, built in 2019, and the foundation had been inspected before I bought it. I grabbed my phone and started documenting everything with photos and videos, zooming in on the streams of water finding their way through microscopic fissures in the concrete. The moisture was collecting in pools on the floor, and I could see it was not going to stop anytime soon. After throwing down every towel I owned and setting up a small pump I kept for emergencies, I went outside to investigate. The snow was piled high around my house, at least 3 feet in most places, and the temperature was hovering around 28 degrees. Colorado winters are brutal, but this year had been particularly harsh. What I found when I walked around to the east side of my property made me want to scream. Someone had built a snow berm. Not just any snow berm, but a carefully constructed wall of packed snow and ice that ran along my property line and angled directly toward my foundation. The berm was at least 4 feet high and extended for about 20 feet, creating a perfect channel that funneled all the melting snow from the neighboring properties straight into my basement wall. The sun was hitting that side of the house hard during the afternoon, which meant the snow was melting consistently and running downhill like a river. I looked over at my neighbor's property and saw Karen Donnelly standing in her driveway talking on her phone. She was wearing a purple puffy coat and designer snow boots, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. Karen was the vice president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, a position she wielded like a weapon against anyone who dared to violate her personal aesthetic standards. She was 52 years old, had that particular haircut that screamed, "Let me speak to your manager," and possessed an uncanny ability to make everyone around her miserable. I walked over to her property line, staying on my side, and called out to her, "Karen, we need to talk." She held up one finger without looking at me, continuing her phone conversation. I stood there in the freezing cold for 5 minutes while she discussed someone's landscaping violations. Finally, she ended the call and turned to me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Zachary, what can I do for you?" Her voice was sweet poison. "Did you build that snow berm along my property line?" I pointed to the obvious structure. "I had my landscaping crew clear my driveway and walkways. The snow has to go somewhere." She shrugged as if this explained everything. "It is going into my basement. You created a channel that is flooding my foundation." Karen pulled out her phone and started scrolling through something. According to the HOA bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 4, homeowners are responsible for managing precipitation on their own property. I am managing my snow. What you do with yours is your business. You cannot redirect water onto my property. That is illegal. I am not redirecting anything. Gravity is redirecting it. Take it up with physics." She smiled again, and I wanted to throw a snowball at her face. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Karen, I am asking you nicely to remove that berm. My basement is flooding right now because of what you did, and I am telling you nicely that I did nothing wrong. If your basement is flooding, perhaps you should check your foundation. Houses in this neighborhood are only 7 years old. Maybe yours was built poorly." She turned and started walking toward her front door. "This is not over," I called after her. "Have a blessed day," she called back without turning around. I stood there in my wet socks and growing rage, realizing I was dealing with someone who had no intention of being reasonable. Karen had been mad at me for months, ever since I filed a complaint with the county about her security lights shining directly into my bedroom window at night. The lights violated the county's light pollution ordinance, and she had been forced to reposition them. Apparently, she had decided that revenge was best served with several thousand gallons of melted snow. Back inside my house, I called my insurance company. The representative who answered was sympathetic but firm. I would need to document everything, get a professional assessment, and prove that the damage was caused by an external source rather than a maintenance issue. She gave me the claim number and told me someone would be out within 3 days to assess the damage. 3 days of water pouring into my basement. Next, I called every plumber in the Denver metro area. It was February, it was freezing, and everyone was dealing with burst pipes and flooding. The first 6 companies I called were booked solid for at least a week. The 7th company, Mile High Plumbing and Restoration, said they could send someone out the next morning for an emergency assessment fee of $300. I agreed immediately. I spent the rest of that day pumping water out of my basement, taking photos, and researching property law. Colorado has specific statutes about water diversion and drainage. According to what I found, property owners cannot alter the natural drainage patterns in ways that cause harm to neighboring properties. What Karen had done was textbook water diversion, and it was absolutely illegal. That night, I barely slept. The pump was running constantly, making a rhythmic humming sound that echoed through the house. Every hour I went down to check on it, emptying the collection bucket and watching more water seep through the walls. I was exhausted and furious, a dangerous combination. The plumber arrived at 8 in the morning sharp. His name was Miguel Rodriguez, and he had been in the business for 23 years. He was a stocky man with graying hair and the kind of competent air that immediately put me at ease. I showed him the basement first, pointing out the water infiltration along the eastern wall. Miguel examined everything carefully, running his hands along the foundation, checking the floor drains, and taking moisture readings with a professional meter. "This is all fresh water," he said. "Not groundwater, not a sewer backup. This is surface water being forced through your foundation. I know where it is coming from." I told him, and I took him outside to show him the snow berm. Miguel stood there in his work coat, studying the berm and the angle it created. He pulled out his phone and started taking photos from multiple directions. Then he took out a measuring tape and documented the height of the berm, the distance from my foundation, and the slope of the ground. "This is deliberate," he said finally. "Someone built this to channel water directly at your house." My neighbor, the HOA vice president. Miguel shook his head slowly. "I see this kind of thing more than you would think. HOA disputes that turn into property damage. Listen, I am going to write you a detailed report. I will document the water infiltration, the damage to your foundation, and the clear causation between that berm and your flooding. You are going to need this for insurance and possibly for court. How bad is the damage? Your foundation has developed stress cracks from the freeze-thaw cycle. When water gets in there and freezes, it expands, making the cracks worse. You have got water damage to your basement floor, and if this continues, you are looking at potential mold issues, structural problems, and thousands of dollars in repairs. We need to stop the source immediately, then deal with the damage that is already done." Miguel spent 2 hours doing his assessment. He went into the crawl space, checked the exterior grading, and even climbed onto my roof to look at the overall drainage pattern of the neighborhood. When he was done, he sat down with me at my kitchen table and went through everything he had found. "Here is what I am putting in my report," he said, pulling out a tablet. "First, your foundation was sound until approximately 1 week ago based on the freshness of the cracks and the water staining patterns. Second, the water infiltration is directly correlated with the artificial berm constructed on the adjacent property. Third, the berm was designed in such a way that it could have no other purpose than to redirect snowmelt toward your foundation. Fourth, the damage is ongoing and will continue to worsen as long as the berm remains in place. Fifth, you are looking at a minimum of $8,000 in immediate repairs, not counting potential future damage from mold or structural issues." I felt sick. $8,000. That is just to repair the foundation cracks, waterproof the wall properly, and remediate the water damage you already have. If mold develops, add another few thousand. If the structural integrity is compromised, we are talking about serious money. Miguel finished his report right there at my kitchen table. It was 12 pages long, complete with photos, diagrams, and technical specifications. He emailed me a copy and kept one for his records. "You are going to win this," he said as he packed up his equipment. "The evidence is clear. Your neighbor caused this damage, and she is liable." After Miguel left, I called my insurance company again and submitted his report along with all my documentation. The adjuster said they would expedite the claim given the ongoing nature of the damage. Then I did something I probably should not have done. I went over to Karen's house. She answered the door in yoga pants and a cashmere sweater, holding a glass of white wine even though it was barely noon. "Zachary, to what do I owe the pleasure? I have a plumber's report that proves you caused the flooding in my basement. I am giving you one chance to remove that berm and settle this before I involve lawyers and your insurance company." Karen took a sip of her wine and looked me up and down. "I have no idea what you are talking about. I have not touched your property. You built a snow berm that is channeling water into my foundation. It is causing thousands of dollars in damage. Prove it," she smiled. I held up my phone, showing her a photo from Miguel's report. "I have 12 pages of professional documentation that prove exactly what you did and the damage it caused." Her smile faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly. That report does not prove anything. Snow melts. Water flows. That is nature, not my fault. Karen, I am trying to be reasonable here. Just remove the berm. I am not removing anything. That snow is on my property, arranged in a way that I see fit. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the HOA. She paused, and her smile grew wider. Oh wait, I am the HOA. I guess you are out of luck. She shut the door in my face. I stood on her porch, shaking with anger. This woman had deliberately caused thousands of dollars in damage to my home and was now hiding behind her HOA position like it made her untouchable. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. I had used Brian Foster for my real estate closing, and he also did civil litigation. He was a sharp guy in his 40s who had no patience for HOA nonsense, having fought several cases against overreaching associations. When I explained the situation, he listened carefully and asked me to send him all my documentation. This is a clear case of negligence and property damage, Brian said after reviewing everything I sent. The plumber's report is excellent, by the way. Very thorough. Here is what we are going to do. First, I am going to send a demand letter to Karen Donnelly, both personally and in her capacity as HOA vice president. The letter will demand immediate removal of the berm and compensation for all damages. Second, I am going to file a claim against her homeowner's insurance. Third, if she does not comply within 48 hours, we are filing for an emergency injunction to force removal of the berm and a civil suit for damages. How much is this going to cost me? I will do the demand letter and insurance claim for a flat fee of $500. If we have to go to court, we will talk about litigation costs, but honestly, I do not think it will get that far. Her insurance company is going to see this report and force her to comply. No insurance company wants to pay out for deliberate property damage when the fix is just removing some snow. I authorized Brian to proceed, and he had the demand letter drafted and sent within 3 hours. It was a beautiful piece of legal writing, laying out exactly what Karen had done, the damage it caused, and the legal consequences she faced if she did not remedy the situation immediately. He sent copies to Karen personally, to the HOA board president, and to her insurance company based on public records. The next morning, I woke up to find my basement had taken on another 6 inches of water overnight. The pump had failed at some point, overwhelmed by the constant influx. I was standing in the flooded basement trying to fix the pump when my doorbell rang. It was 3 members of the HOA board, Karen, the president Robert Chen, and the treasurer Patricia Hayes. They stood on my porch looking official and stern. "We need to discuss your harassment of Karen," Robert said. He was a thin man in his 60s who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Harassment? She is flooding my basement. We have reviewed the situation and we do not believe Karen has done anything wrong. However, your aggressive behavior toward her is creating a hostile environment in the neighborhood." Patricia chimed in. She was in her 50s with steel gray hair and a perpetual frown. I could not believe what I was hearing. My aggressive behavior? She deliberately built a snow berm to flood my house. I have professional documentation proving it. Karen spoke up, her voice dripping with false concern. "Zachary, we are all very sorry you are having water problems. But you cannot go around blaming your neighbors for natural weather events. It is creating tension in the community. This is not a natural weather event. This is you committing property damage." Robert held up a hand. "We are here to issue you a formal warning. If you continue to harass board members, we will be forced to take disciplinary action, including potential fines." "You've got to be kidding me." "We are very serious," Patricia said. "This warning is being documented. Please govern yourself accordingly." They left, and I immediately called Brian. He was livid when I told him what happened. "They are retaliating against you for making a legal claim. That is illegal. I am going to amend our complaint to include HOA harassment and retaliation." This just made their position so much worse. That afternoon, Karen's insurance company called me directly. The adjuster, a woman named Sandra Phillips, introduced herself and asked if she could come inspect the damage. I agreed, and she arrived 2 hours later with a contractor in tow. Sandra was all business, professional, and efficient. She reviewed Miguel's report, inspected my basement, examined the snow berm, and took her own set of photos and measurements. The contractor, a man named Dave, confirmed everything Miguel had found and added a few additional concerns about potential long-term structural issues. When they were done, Sandra asked to speak with me privately. We sat in my living room while the contractor loaded equipment back into their truck. "Mr. Thompson, I am going to be straight with you. This is one of the clearest cases of property damage I have seen in my 15 years doing this job. There is no question that the berm caused your flooding, and there is no question that it was deliberately constructed. However, there is a problem." My stomach dropped. "What problem?" "Karen Donnelly has not reported this to her insurance. I am here because your lawyer filed a claim directly against her policy." When I called Karen this morning to notify her of the claim, she denied everything and said she would not cooperate with the investigation. Can she do that? Technically, yes, but it does not help her. When a claim is filed against someone's homeowner's policy, we are required to investigate. We have done that investigation, and we have determined that she is at fault. Now, normally we would work with the policyholder to resolve the situation. But since she is refusing to cooperate and is actively denying responsibility despite overwhelming evidence, we are in a difficult position. Sandra leaned forward and her voice became more confidential. Off the record, I think she is betting that you will give up or that she can intimidate you through the HOA. She does not understand that we have already made our determination. Her insurance is going to pay for your damages regardless of what she wants because the evidence is clear. But it would be much simpler if she would just remove that berm and admit fault. What happens now? We are going to send her a formal notice that we are accepting liability for the claim and that she needs to remove the source of the damage immediately. If she does not comply within 24 hours, we will have it removed ourselves and charge her the cost. Meanwhile, we will begin processing your damage claim. Based on the estimates I have seen, we are looking at approximately $10,000 in repairs and remediation. Miguel said $8,000. Dave found some additional concerns about your floor joists. They have taken on a lot of moisture. We are being thorough to make sure everything is covered. Sandra left and I felt a tiny bit of hope for the first time in days. The insurance company was on my side, the evidence was clear, and Karen was about to learn that she could not bully her way out of consequences. That night I went outside to check on the berm. It was still there, still channeling water into my foundation. I stood in the cold watching my basement flood in slow motion, and I decided I had had enough of being passive. I pulled out my phone and called the City of Denver's Code Enforcement Office. I explained the situation to the code enforcement officer who answered, a guy named Tom Martinez. He listened carefully and then asked me to email him photos and documentation. I sent him everything, including Miguel's report and Sandra's preliminary findings. Tom called me back 30 minutes later. Mr. Thompson, what you are describing is a violation of Denver Municipal Code Section 27-412, which prohibits property owners from altering drainage patterns in ways that cause damage to neighboring properties. I am going to send an inspector out tomorrow morning. The code enforcement inspector arrived at 9 in the morning, a serious woman in her 30s named Jennifer Kim. She examined everything with meticulous care, taking official photos and measurements. She also knocked on Karen's door. I watched from my window as they had what appeared to be a heated conversation on Karen's front porch. Jennifer came over to my house when she was done. I am issuing a code violation notice to Ms. Donnelly. She has 24 hours to remove the berm and restore natural drainage patterns. If she does not comply, the city will remove it and bill her for the cost, plus she will face fines of up to $1,000 per day until the violation is corrected. Thank you, I said, feeling genuine relief. I see this kind of thing more than I should, Jennifer said, shaking her head. People think HOA positions give them power over basic laws. They do not. If she does not comply, call me directly. She handed me her card that evening. I was working in my home office when I heard machinery outside. I looked out the window and saw a small excavator in Karen's driveway. 2 workers were systematically dismantling the snow berm, loading the snow into a dump truck. The operation took about an hour, and when they were done, the berm was completely gone. I went outside to inspect. The snow had been removed, but the damage was already done. My foundation was cracked, my basement had suffered extensive water damage, and I still had standing water in my crawl space. I documented the removal with photos and videos, then went back inside to update Brian and Sandra. Over the next week, things moved quickly. Sandra's insurance company approved my claim for $10,300, covering all repairs and remediation. They sent contractors to my house who repaired the foundation cracks, waterproofed the entire eastern wall, replaced damaged insulation, and treated the area for potential mold. The work took 5 days, and when they were done, my basement was in better shape than it had been before the flooding. The bill went directly to Karen's insurance company, which then went after Karen for the deductible and potential policy cancellation for failing to report the claim and cooperating with the investigation. I learned this from Sandra, who called me after everything was complete. I wanted to let you know that we have closed your claim, Sandra said. Everything has been repaired and you should not have any further issues. However, I also wanted to give you a heads up that we are dropping Karen Donnelly's policy effective next month. You are dropping her? She filed a false statement with us, claiming she had nothing to do with the damage. When we confronted her with the evidence, she maintained the lie. Then she failed to report the code enforcement violation and the removal of the berm. She also did not cooperate with our investigation at any stage. We have determined that she is too high of a risk to insure. What does that mean for her? It means she will have to find new homeowners insurance, and when insurers see that she was dropped for cause, her premiums are going to be very expensive. It also means that if you decide to pursue additional damages beyond what we have paid, you would have to sue her personally because she no longer has coverage for this incident. I thanked Sandra and hung up, feeling a sense of justice. But I was not done yet. Brian had filed a civil suit against Karen for punitive damages, emotional distress, and retaliation through the HOA. We were asking for $25,000 on top of what insurance had paid. The case went to mediation 2 months later. Karen showed up with her own lawyer, a nervous young associate from a budget law firm who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Brian and I sat across the table from them in a conference room in downtown Denver, with a professional mediator named Helen Granger running the session. Helen went through the facts of the case methodically. She reviewed all the evidence, including Miguel's report, the city code enforcement violation, the insurance company's findings, and the documentation of the HOA's retaliatory warning. Then she asked Karen directly, "Mrs. Donnelly, do you dispute any of the facts as presented?" Karen's lawyer jumped in. "We dispute the characterization of my client's actions as deliberate. The snow had to go somewhere, and she made a reasonable decision about where to place it." Brian pulled out a diagram. This shows the other 3 sides of Ms. Donnelly's property where the snow could have been placed without causing any damage to anyone. Instead, she chose the one location that would maximize damage to my client's home. This was not reasonable. This was retaliatory. Retaliatory for what? Karen's lawyer asked. For Mr. Thompson filing a legitimate complaint about her illegal security lighting. Ms. Donnelly has a documented history of using her HOA position to harass residents who challenge her. We spent 4 hours in mediation. Karen's lawyer tried every angle to reduce liability, but the evidence was overwhelming. Finally, Helen called us into separate rooms. She met with me and Brian first. "Here is my assessment," Helen said. "You have an airtight case. If this goes to trial, you will win, probably for more than $25,000 given the punitive nature of her actions and the HOA retaliation. However, trials are expensive and time-consuming. Karen's lawyer knows they are going to lose. They are willing to settle for $15,000 plus a written apology and a guarantee that the HOA will rescind their warning against you." Brian looked at me. "It is your call." I thought about it. $15,000 plus the $10,000 insurance had paid meant Karen was out $25,000 total. She would lose her insurance, pay me $15,000, and have to publicly apologize. It was not everything I wanted, but it was justice. "I will take it," I said. The settlement was signed that afternoon. Karen had to write a check for $15,000, which she did with shaking hands and a face that had gone pale. Her lawyer handed over a written apology that read, "I, Karen Donnelly, apologize to Zachary Thompson for my actions that led to damage to his property. I take full responsibility for the snow berm that caused flooding in his basement and for any distress my actions caused." The HOA board also signed a document rescinding their warning and acknowledging that I had been the victim, not the aggressor. Robert Chen looked embarrassed as he signed. Patricia Hayes looked angry but signed anyway. When it was all over, Brian and I walked out of the mediation center into the spring sunshine. It was late April, the snow had long since melted, and Denver was coming back to life with green leaves and warm weather. "You handled that well," Brian said. "A lot of people would have wanted to drag her through court just for the satisfaction." "I thought about it," I admitted. "But this works. She paid, she apologized, and everyone knows what she did." What I did not know at the time was that the story was not quite over. 2 weeks after the settlement, I received a call from Robert Chen. He sounded tired. "Zachary, I wanted to let you know that Karen has resigned from the HOA board." "She resigned?" "Yes." After word got around the neighborhood about what happened, several residents came forward with their own complaints about her behavior. "Apparently, she has been using her position to bully people for years, and your case gave others the courage to speak up. The board asked for a resignation, and she gave it." "Wow, I also wanted to apologize personally. Patricia and I should have investigated your complaint instead of just taking Karen's side. We failed in our duty to be impartial, and I am sorry." "I appreciate that, Robert. We are making some changes to how the HOA operates. More transparency, clearer complaint procedures, and term limits for board members. We do not want this to happen again." After I hung up, I sat on my back deck with a beer and thought about everything that had happened. Karen had tried to use her position and her connections to get away with deliberating damaging my property. She had bet that I would be too intimidated or too exhausted to fight back. She had been wrong. The basement was repaired and better than ever. I had $15,000 in the bank as compensation. Karen was out of the HOA and would be paying inflated insurance premiums for years. And the neighborhood had learned that HOA board positions did not put anyone above the law. Life in Meadowbrook Estates settled into a new normal over the following months. I kept mostly to myself, working from home and enjoying my properly functioning basement. The new HOA board was actually reasonable, focusing on legitimate community issues like street maintenance and park upkeep, rather than petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. I saw Karen occasionally, usually pulling into her driveway as I was getting my mail or taking out the trash. She never looked at me, never acknowledged my existence. That was fine with me. I had no interest in gloating or rubbing her nose in what had happened. The consequences spoke for themselves. One evening in June, I was grilling on my back deck when my doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone, so I was surprised to find a young couple standing on my porch. They introduced themselves as Marcus and Julie Stevens, and they were looking at houses in the neighborhood. "We are considering buying the house 2 doors down from you," Marcus explained. "The realtor suggested we talk to some of the neighbors to get a feel for the community. Do you mind if we ask you a few questions?" I invited them to join me on the deck, and we talked for over an hour. They were in their early 30s, expecting their first child and looking for a safe neighborhood with good schools. I told them about Meadowbrook Estates honestly. The homes were well built, the location was convenient, and the schools were excellent. I also told them about the HOA drama and how it had been resolved. "So the HOA is better now?" Julie asked. "Much better. They learned a hard lesson about accountability. But I would still read the bylaws carefully before you buy. Make sure you understand what you are getting into." They thanked me for my honesty and left. 2 weeks later, I saw a moving truck at the house 2 doors down. Marcus and Julie had decided to buy, and I felt good about that. They seemed like genuinely nice people, and the neighborhood needed more of those and fewer Karens. The summer passed peacefully. I did some traveling, visited family in Ohio, and generally enjoyed not being in constant conflict with my neighbor. My basement stayed dry through several rainstorms, proof that the repairs had been done properly. Every time it rained, I went downstairs to check, and every time, everything was perfect. In September, I received a notice that Karen had put her house up for sale. According to the real estate listing, she was relocating out of state for work. I suspected the truth was that she could not stand living in a neighborhood where everyone knew what she had done. The whisper network in suburban communities is powerful, and once your reputation is destroyed, it is almost impossible to rebuild it. Her house sold in October to a retired couple from California. They introduced themselves to all the neighbors with homemade cookies and friendly smiles. They were everything Karen had not been: kind, considerate, and respectful of boundaries. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. November brought the first snow of the season, and I would be lying if I said I did not feel a little anxious watching it pile up. But my new neighbors hired the same snow removal service I used, and everyone on the street was careful to pile their snow in ways that did not impact drainage. The city had also done some work on the storm drains in our area, improving overall water management. On Thanksgiving, the Stevens family invited me and several other neighbors over for dinner. It was a warm, chaotic gathering with good food and genuine conversation. Patricia Hayes was there, and she pulled me aside at one point. "I never properly apologized for how I treated you during that whole mess with Karen," she said quietly. "I was wrong. I let my friendship with her cloud my judgment, and you suffered for it." "I appreciate you saying that, Patricia. I resigned from the HOA board last month. I realized I was part of the problem. The new board is younger, more diverse, and more focused on actually serving the community. It is what we should have been doing all along." We shook hands, and I felt the last bit of residual anger drain away. Holding on to resentment was not going to change what had happened, and people who genuinely apologized deserved forgiveness. December was busy with work deadlines and holiday preparations. On Christmas Eve, I was sitting in my living room with a fire going and some old movies on television when I noticed an envelope had been slipped under my front door. Inside was a simple card with a handwritten note. "Mr. Thompson, I wanted to thank you. My family moved into the neighborhood in August, and we heard the story about what you went through with the previous HOA board. Because you stood up to them, the HOA has changed completely. Our experience has been wonderful, and I know that would not have been possible without your courage. Thank you for making this neighborhood better. Happy holidays. Sarah Patel." I did not know Sarah Patel personally, but the note made me realize that what had happened had ripple effects beyond just my own situation. By refusing to be bullied and by holding Karen accountable, I had helped create change that benefited everyone in the community. The year ended quietly, and when January arrived, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. It had been almost a full year since that February morning when I discovered water in my basement. A year since Karen Donnelly had tried to use snow as a weapon. A year since I learned that fighting back against injustice, even in something as mundane as a neighborhood dispute, was worth the effort. The $15,000 settlement had gone into savings. earmarked for future home improvements. The basement that had been flooded and damaged was now pristine, with professional waterproofing that would last for decades. The foundation cracks that could have become serious structural issues had been repaired by experts on someone else's dime. But the biggest change was not physical. It was the knowledge that standing up for yourself matters, that documentation and evidence trump bullying and intimidation, that insurance companies and legal systems, for all their flaws, do work when you have truth on your side, and that communities are better when people refuse to let petty tyrants go unchallenged. I ran into Brian Foster at a coffee shop in February, almost exactly 1 year after the flooding started. We caught up on life, and he mentioned that he had taken on 2 more HOA cases in the past few months. "Your case kind of became famous in local legal circles," he said with a grin. "Anytime someone comes to me with an HOA nightmare, I tell them about the Great Snow Berm War. It shows that homeowners can win if they document everything and do not give up. I am glad something good came out of it. More than you know, one of my new clients was being fined by her HOA for having the wrong shade of beige on her shutters. The HOA wanted $5,000 in fines for a supposed violation. I sent them a demand letter referencing your case and the concept of reasonable enforcement. They backed down immediately. We talked for another half hour, and as I drove home, I thought about how strange life could be. A vindictive neighbor's attempt at revenge had turned into a legal precedent that was helping other people. Karen Donnelly's malicious snow berm had backfired so spectacularly that it was now being used as an example of what not to do. Spring came early that year, with the snow melting in March instead of lingering into April. I watched the runoff carefully, but my basement stayed dry. The drainage patterns around my house were working exactly as they should, and the repairs continued to hold up perfectly. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA held elections in April, and the new board was exactly what Robert Chen had promised. Younger, more diverse, and focused on community service rather than rule enforcement. They organized a neighborhood cleanup day, started a community garden, and created a welcome committee for new residents. It was everything an HOA should be. I volunteered for the community garden project, working alongside neighbors I had never really talked to before. We spent Saturday mornings turning a neglected common area into raised beds for vegetables and flowers. It was good, honest work, and it helped build real connections in the community. Marcus Stevens worked next to me one morning, and we got to talking about fatherhood. His daughter had been born in March, and he was sleep-deprived but happy. "You know, when we were deciding whether to buy here, the thing that convinced us was how you handled that situation with Karen," he said, tamping down soil around a tomato plant. "It showed us that this was a community where people stood up for what was right. That matters when you are raising kids." "I appreciate that, Marcus. I just did what anyone would do. No, most people would have given up. They would have eaten the cost, let the bully win, and moved on. You fought back and you won. That takes courage." As spring turned to summer, I found myself thinking less and less about the whole ordeal. It was becoming just another chapter in my life story, an interesting anecdote rather than a defining moment. The basement was dry, the neighborhood was peaceful, and Karen Donnelly was someone else's problem now, presumably terrorizing a new HOA in whatever state she had moved to. In July, I received a check for $600. It was a refund from Karen's insurance company for overpayment on the claim. Apparently, one of the contractors had charged less than estimated, and the savings were being returned to me. I deposited the check and used the money to buy a high-quality sump pump as a backup to my existing system. I never wanted to deal with a flooded basement again. The neighborhood threw a block party in August, and nearly every house participated. We closed off the street, set up grills and tables, and spent the evening eating, drinking, and celebrating the community we had built. The new HOA board organized everything, and it was clear they understood that their job was to bring people together, not tear them apart. I sat on my front lawn that evening, watching kids run around with sparklers and neighbors chatting in small groups. This was what a community was supposed to feel like. Safe, welcoming, and built on mutual respect. It had taken a crisis to get here, but we had made it. September brought cooler weather and the start of another school year. The neighborhood quieted down as routines reasserted themselves. I fell back into my work schedule, taking on a new project that kept me busy but satisfied. Life had a rhythm again, a comfortable normalcy that I did not take for granted. On the anniversary of the mediation settlement, I treated myself to a nice dinner at my favorite steakhouse. It was my way of marking the end of a difficult period and celebrating coming out the other side intact. As I sat there with a good meal and a better bourbon, I thought about everything I had learned. I learned that documentation is your best friend in any dispute. Photos, videos, professional reports, and written communications create an evidence trail that is hard to dispute. I learned that insurance companies care about facts and liability, not personal relationships or social dynamics. I learned that most lawyers are happy to help when you have a strong case, and that legal fees are worth it when the alternative is being a victim. I learned that HOA boards are not above the law, no matter how much power they think they have. I learned that building codes and property laws exist for good reasons, and that local government will enforce them if you know how to ask. I learned that bullies bank on their victims being too tired or too scared to fight back, and that standing your ground changes the entire dynamic. Most importantly, I learned that justice is not automatic. It requires effort, persistence, and sometimes a willingness to spend money and time on principle. But when you get it, when the system actually works and the wrongdoer faces real consequences, it restores your faith in how things should be. The second winter came and went without incident. My basement stayed dry through multiple snowstorms and the spring thaw. The waterproofing and foundation repairs had been worth every penny, even though I had not paid for them. Karen's insurance company had done quality work, probably because they knew they were liable and wanted to avoid any future claims. By the time summer rolled around again, the whole incident felt like ancient history. New neighbors had moved in, people who had never known Karen Donnelly or witnessed the Great Snow Berm War. They knew me as just another friendly neighbor, not as the guy who had fought the HOA and won. I preferred it that way. I had never wanted to be defined by conflict. I had just wanted to protect my home and hold someone accountable for deliberate property damage. The fact that it had turned into a larger battle about HOA overreach and community standards was almost accidental, but sometimes accidental battles are the most important ones. They happen because someone has to say enough is enough. They happen because one person decides that being reasonable does not mean being a doormat. They happen because standing up for yourself can inspire others to do the same. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA continued to evolve in positive directions. They revised the bylaws to include clearer processes for complaints and appeals. They created a committee to review board decisions for fairness. They instituted term limits to prevent any one person from accumulating too much power. All of these changes could trace their origin back to that February morning when Karen Donnelly decided that a snow berm would be a clever way to get revenge. I still live in the same house, working from the same home office, enjoying the same quiet suburban life I had before everything happened. The basement is dry, the foundation is solid, and my neighbors are respectful people who understand that we are all just trying to live our lives in peace. Sometimes when it snows, I stand at my window and watch it fall. I watch it accumulate on roofs and yards, beautiful and cold and potentially destructive. I think about how something as innocent as snow became a weapon in the hands of someone petty and vindictive. And I think about how that attempt at harm ultimately failed because evidence does not lie, and systems do work when good people demand accountability. Karen Donnelly taught me a valuable lesson, though I doubt she intended to. She taught me that you can survive being targeted by someone in power. You can fight back against injustice even when it seems overwhelming. You can win even when the system appears rigged against you. All you need is truth, documentation, and the willingness to see it through to the end. My basement is dry. My foundation is solid. My neighborhood is peaceful. And somewhere Karen Donnelly is probably terrorizing some other community, building metaphorical snow berms against anyone who dares to cross her. But that is not my problem anymore. I fought my battle, I won, and I moved on with my life. That is the real victory. Not the money, not the apology, not even the satisfaction of seeing her face consequences. The real victory is reclaiming your peace, protecting your home, and knowing that you stood up for yourself when it mattered most. Everything else is just details. The house across the street from me sold recently to a young family with twin boys. They came over to introduce themselves, and I welcomed them warmly. They asked about the neighborhood, the schools, the HOA. I told them the truth. It was a good place to live with good people and an HOA that had learned from its mistakes. We heard there was some drama a few years ago, the father said carefully. There was, I admitted, but it got resolved. The people involved are gone, and the community is better for it. That is good to know. We were worried about HOA horror stories. Every neighborhood has some drama. What matters is how it gets handled. This one handled it well, eventually. They seemed satisfied with that answer, and we talked about easier subjects like where to find the best pizza in the area and which parks had the best playgrounds. Normal neighbor conversation, the kind that builds community rather than tearing it down. As I watched them walk back to their house, I felt content. The neighborhood had healed, the systems had worked, justice had been served, and life had gone on as it always does, finding its way back to normal after even the worst disruptions. My basement is dry, and that is all that really matters in the end.